And we're starting off this list with the Comedy Store in West Hollywood. The Comedy Store in West Hollywood had a reputation for being haunted for a long time due to a slew of reported supernatural experiences and encounters. Staff, comedians, and patrons have shared stories of unexplained sounds, shadowy figures, and eerie sensations while in the building, especially in the basement. Footsteps have been heard echoing in empty halls, and snarling sounds have also been reported. Some attribute these occurrences to the building's past, as it was formerly a nightclub called Zero, a very hip place in the 40s and 50s, but with ties to the mob. And the basement is where a lot of problem people were dealt with. Tragic events that have taken place there over the years may have left behind some lingering energy. Visitors have described sudden drops in temperature, objects moving on their own, and a general sense of someone or something watching them. The Comedy Store's paranormal stories have become so well known that there are even ghost tours of the club's supposedly haunted basement nowadays. Number 9, the Warner Pacific Theater, now called the Hollywood Pacific Theater. This historic building is said to be haunted by Sam Warner, one of the Warner brothers, who put a ton of hard work and money into opening this theater, the first to be built for sound. In 1927, the theater was going to hold the premiere for the Warner Bros. Produced film, The Jazz Singer, the very first sound film, or talkie as it was referred to at the time. But there were construction delays, so the film was going to have its premiere in New York instead. But just one day before this big premiere, Sam Warner would collapse, dead of a cerebral hemorrhage. He never got to hear the reviews. He never got to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But some have reported feeling his ghostly presence in the theater to this very day, or even catching a glimpse of his ghostly presence making his way through the building. The elevator has been seen going up and down by itself, and apparently Sam's ghost likes moving things around in his old office or even scratching at the door. Number 8, we have the Hollywood sign itself. Legend has it that the ghost of Peg Entwistle, an aspiring actress in the 1920s and early 30s, roams the area near the sign. Peg Entwistle was a struggling actress who never really made it. On September 18, 1932, a hiker discovered a shoe, purse, and jacket close to the sign. They soon found her body in a ravine below the sign, and it was determined that Entwistle had climbed a workman's ladder and jumped from the letter H of the sign. It's said that her spirit still haunts the area to this day. Some say they spotted a ghostly figure or felt a cold breeze on the path leading to the sign. Locals and hikers have reported sensing an unexplainable presence or catching a glimpse of a ghostly woman in old-fashioned clothing ascending the hill as nighttime falls over the Hollywood Hills. Some claim to hear faint echoes of her footsteps or hear her cries carried by the wind. Next on the list we have Griffith Park. The sprawling urban park is known for its fun attractions and natural beauty. I mean, it is a park after all. Covering over 4,000 acres, the park offers a mix of hiking trails, picnic areas, the iconic Griffith Observatory, and even a zoo, although it's abandoned. But aside from all that nice stuff, Griffith Park is also a reputation for being haunted. Legend says that the land was cursed in 1863 by a girl named Donna Petronilla, whose uncle, a wealthy land baron, cut her out of his will. And one of the most famous haunted spots within the park is the Griffith Observatory itself, sitting on a hill overlooking the city. This historic landmark has had a number of ghost stories associated with it. Some claim to have seen shadowy figures moving about the observatory after hours, while others report hearing unexplained footsteps echoing throughout the halls. Another haunted hotspot is the old zoo area, abandoned in sometime in the 1960s or late 50s. The dilapidated remnants of cages have fueled tales of these ghostly animal sounds and the figures of former zoo inhabitants. Ghost animals. I've never heard that one before, though. I like it. Local lore also says Griffith Park has some darker stories, including alleged occult activity. Number 6, the Colorado Street Bridge. The Colorado Street Bridge in Pasadena, California has a spooky reputation due to its sad history. It was completed in 1913, and it's a gorgeous bridge, but it's known for more than just its impressive looks. Back during the Great Depression, a lot of people ended their lives on the bridge, which has led to its pretty on-the-nose nickname. You can probably imagine what it is. So, because of these tragedies, folks started telling stories about the bridge being haunted. People who have been there talk about strange things like ghostly apparitions and shadows that don't make sense, or hearing whispers or disembodied voices. There's one story about a woman being seen crossing the bridge, cars swerving in order to avoid hitting her, only for the woman to vanish out of thin air. Stories like this have made the bridge pretty famous in books, movies, and even TV. And at number 5, we have the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. First used in 1899, there are tons of Hollywood celebrities buried there, and it's still an active cemetery to this day. It's also said to be incredibly haunted. Are there any cemeteries that aren't haunted though? Visitors have reported all kinds of paranormal activity here. You have your standard haunted place, like kind of stuff, cold spots, disembodied voices, semi-translucent people roaming around. But one that comes up a lot apparently is that of a woman crying by a lake on the cemetery grounds. Of course, she vanishes when you approach her. I do imagine there is plenty of crying going on in a cemetery because of all the dead people, but this is different. Next up, we have Grauman's Chinese Theater. This is probably one of the most famous movie theaters in the world. Its forecourt has concrete tiles with the handprints and signatures of various different stars, and the building itself takes inspiration from ancient Chinese architecture. The theater was opened by Sid Grauman in 1927, and apparently he had built hidden rooms in the theater for his famous friends to party in, and there was like a buzzer system that would allow them inside these rooms. Those hidden rooms have since been sealed off, but one famous story tells of an employee in the 90s who kept hearing buzzers going off in some of these old secret rooms, although the buzzers had long been disconnected as well. There's also said to be the ghost of a former employee of the theater named Fritz, who took his own life behind the movie screen. And there's also apparently a ghost of a young girl in old-timey clothing named Annabelle, who roams about the theater at night. Coming in at number 3, we have the Pantages Theater. This theater, located in the heart of Hollywood, is a historic building with a reputation for being haunted by ghouls and ghosts. Built in 1930, the theater has hosted a variety of performances over the years, vaudeville acts, films, and back in 1949, Howard Hughes, the millionaire aviator, took control of RKO Studios and its main theater, Pantages. He set up his fancy offices in the second floor, and his presence is often still felt even today, apparently. Hughes seems to have a unique signal, the smell of cigarette smoke, which seems to announce his arrival, although he disliked smoking. A ghostly apparition of him, tall and thin in a simple suit, has been reported being seen walking through a wall that used to be his office doorway. But he's not the only specter said to haunt the building. In 1932, a woman passed away in the mezzanine during a show. Over time, people started hearing a woman's voice singing in the theater, sometimes during the day and even late at night after everyone left. The staff had a theory. The woman might have been an aspiring singer who came to enjoy musicals in the 30s. Now she seems to be living her dream by performing on stage herself. Engineers have even caught her voice on a live performance microphone in one show, even though no one could actually see her on stage. Coming in at number 2, we have the Cecil Hotel. If you have any interest in haunted buildings or just creepy internet content, there's no doubt that you've heard of the Cecil Hotel. This historic hotel, now an affordable housing complex known as the Stay on Main, is pretty famous for a series of dark incidents. A lot of deaths have taken place there, and the circumstances of some of them are quite mysterious, some of which have never even been solved. Probably the most famous case this building is connected to is Elisa Lam, who had gone missing for a while with nothing but footage of her kind of erratic behavior captured in one of the elevator's security cameras. Her body was eventually found, however. She had managed to make her way to the roof, where she fell into an open water tank. She was discovered after guests had reported their water running black and having an odd taste. The Cecil was also home to some pretty notorious people, like the Night Stalker himself, Richard Ramirez. There are so many dark stories surrounding this place that many believe it to be haunted by countless spirits of those who met their end within its walls. And finally, we have the Roosevelt Hotel. The Hollywood Roosevelt is rumored to be haunted by the ghost of Marilyn Monroe. There used to be a mirror in the lobby where people would report spotting her reflection when taking a picture in front of it. Room 928 is also supposedly haunted by the ghost of Montgomery Clift, who lived in the room while filming Here to Eternity. There have been a number of stories where people hear the sounds of a trumpet playing coming from the room, even when the room is vacant. The hotel switchboard is also known to receive calls from empty rooms, and faucets and lights have been known to turn on by themselves as well. I like the sound of this. Nothing necessarily harmful going on. You got some trumpet playing in the room next to you. Your lights turn out without you even having to get up. You can snap a picture with Marilyn Monroe on your way out. When you look at it that way, it sounds like a pretty relaxing time.
First up in our number 10 spot is the Terralinga Casita. So it's one thing to stay in a haunted room, and it's another thing entirely to stay in a house that's in a full-on ghost town. But if that sounds like your kind of thing, then this haunted casita might just be the best place for your next paranormal girls trip. Back in the 1800s, Terralinga, Texas was once a thriving mining community known for its production of mercury. However, as the demand for mercury declined in the early 1900s, the town's prosperity dwindled and most of the population moved away. By the mid-20th century, Terralinga was mostly abandoned, leaving behind a ghost town with only a few remaining structures. But it's not just abandoned, it's also believed to be haunted by many of its former residents. So if you are looking for a haunted visit, a limestone cabin near an old jail and a graveyard is a good bet to run into some spooky spirits. Just be careful, as you never know which spirits can wander in and watch you while you sleep. Moving on to number 9, Laura's house. Despite there being no formal mention of an unearthly presence in the Airbnb listing for Laura's cottage, it's widely known that this historic residence in downtown Savannah, Georgia is haunted by an unseen entity. Built in 1799, the cottage is named after its eternal guest, Laura, who truthfully we don't really know much about other than the fact that she haunts the cottage and grew the beautiful flowers that still adorn the cottage grounds. Now, aside from it being an Airbnb hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts, the home is frequently featured on walking ghost tours of the city, and guests have claimed that Laura, the ghost, was very active during their stay. Thankfully, while she isn't shy, Laura seems to be friendly to most, although a young mother who stayed in the cottage reported that Laura threw a deck of cards off the table in her direction and it totally freaked her out. So I guess just maybe make sure you stay on her good side. Moving on to number 8, Taliston House. Located in Great Dunmow, UK, the haunted bedroom at the Taliston is sure to be an unforgettable stay. As soon as you step into the haunted bedroom at Taliston, you're transported back into the early 1900s, and the owner has worked tirelessly to replicate the room of a young Edwardian child, complete with books and toys of the time. But why is that the vibe they are going for? Well, aside from young ghosts being the scariest ones in horror movies, it's rumored that a boy used to live in this room and complained of hearing lots of unsettling sounds every evening. Sadly, he suddenly died, and in their grief, his parents sealed up the room out of fear that their son and whatever it was he heard would haunt them. Fast forward 100 years or so, and the room was reopened when the house's current owner moved in and decided to renovate it. But it's said the boy really does haunt the room, and guests who have stayed say they have experienced very strange occurrences during their stay. Moving on to number 7, Malaga Inn. Located in Alabama, the Malaga Inn is a charming historic property celebrated for its unique architecture, rich history, and of course that it's sure to provide a spooky haunted stay. Now obviously that's not everyone's cup of tea, so there are some rooms that are said to be free of wandering spirits. But if ghostly visitors are something you are interested in, then be sure to book room 007. Rumor has it that this room is home to a mischievous ghost of a woman in a white dress, and many visitors claim that the temperature in the room drops as soon as she enters. Now, that part you can fix with an extra sweater, so not not so bad. But that's not all she is known for. Visitors claim the woman in white will lurk around the room all hours of the day, slamming doors and flickering lights, and some even say they witnessed the chandelier swinging from the ceiling. Let's just hope they are properly hung up there, otherwise that could be a big disaster. Moving on to number 6, Hobo Hill House. Located in Jefferson City, Missouri, this 5,000 square foot house is said to be haunted by a myriad of spirits, and according to everyone that stays, they waste no time making themselves known. From a full-bodied apparition of a man wearing a top hat to flickering lights and flying objects, you are sure to encounter a spirit or 2 or 6 during your stay. And while most seem to be pretty friendly, that doesn't mean that they all are. In fact, apparently the first group to rent after the owners put up their Airbnb listing didn't even last the entire evening. Now, that being said, there are many who adore that kind of thing and have had a blast staying in this haunted house with the spirits, so just be sure you are ready to hang with some spooky entities before you book a night here. Moving on to number 5, Parks Bowman Mansion. You'd be hard-pressed to find a building in New Orleans that wasn't haunted, and the Parks and Bowman Mansion is no different. Mostly. There are actually 3 rooms available to book in this 130-year-old Garden District mansion, but only one of them is said to be haunted. Per the listing, guests share the haunted bedroom with the ghost of a girl in a yellow dress from the 1890s who was buried on the property after a sudden death. Now, officially, the listing maintains that the ghost girl can be quite shy, and some say they haven't even seen her during their visit. But of course, that's not true across the board. Other reports claim the girl walks with a limp and may be found roaming the grounds while humming creepy lullabies. Either way, just make sure you don't mind being watched while you sleep, as you are almost certainly in store for that during your stay. Coming in at number 4, Civil War House. Not only is this historical Civil War farmhouse located in the notoriously haunted Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, but during the Civil War, the farmhouse and barn were used as a Civil War field, and the property was actually used as a makeshift hospital for the soldiers in the gruesome battle. So, safe to say, it's pretty haunted. And unlike some of the others on this list, the owner is not trying to keep that a secret. The Airbnb host admits to being the home's only living occupant, but that there are many others who live there with her. Now, she doesn't specify exactly how many other spirits roam the property, but it is advertised as being incredibly haunted, which probably means that there are tons of them. Now, the ghosts are purported to be friendly, but some visitors have had a different experience. Some claim that at night they have heard tortured screams of the soldiers so loud that it woke them up in the middle of the night. So if you do visit, maybe just bring a pair of earplugs. I mean, unless you want to hear the screams. It's your vacation, so you do what you want. Coming in at number 3, Castello del Pazzo. Now, full disclosure, if you couldn't tell from the name, this listing is a full-on Italian castle, meaning that it is stunningly gorgeous and beautiful, but it will also cost you more than a few bucks to stay here. That being said, if you have some extra money to spend on a haunted visit, this would definitely be one to add to your list. According to legend, the ghost that haunts this castle was once a young woman named Barbara, who fell in love with an army captain named Matteo way back in 1467. But before the lovers could elope, Barbara's father found out about their affair and locked her in the tower of this very castle. Sadly, while she was locked away, her lover Matteo was being exiled to France. But poor Barbara, trapped in the tower with no ties to the outside world, had no clue he had been sent away and died in the tower waiting for him to return and rescue her. Today, visitors of the Castello del Pazzo say that they've seen Barbara looking out from the tower window, still waiting for Matteo to come back. And others say you can hear her screaming cries each night when he does not not return. Coming in at number 2, the Stroud House. Built in 1940, the Stroud House in North Carolina has been in the family for several generations, and according to its listing, it's also been haunted for as long as, well, anyone can remember. According to several friends, family, guests, and the owners themselves, you will not be short on supernatural experiences during your stay. Those that have stayed report events including hearing footsteps in the hallway, lights turning on and off on their own, orbs in the living room, and a music box that appears as though it's magically playing by itself. But the scariest encounter you might run into is a shadowy figure that likes to hang out in the kitchen and dining room. Now, the good news is that so far none of the activity has been reported as malevolent, so it doesn't seem like you're gonna run into any poltergeists while you're here, but there's always a first time for everything. And last up in our number 1 spot is Captain Grant's. This historic bed and breakfast dates back to 1754, when Captain Grant built a beautiful home for his family. The house, which is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, withstood the Revolutionary and Civil Wars, and like many buildings from its time, is well known for its overwhelming paranormal activity. 'Cause, you know, lots of people died here. While there are said to be spirits all throughout the grounds, if you're looking for a ghostly encounter for your stay, the Adelaide room is the one you want to pick. While staying in this room, one guest reported having her face caressed by invisible hands, while another visitor claimed that a woman dressed in colonial-era garb holding hands with young people could be seen wandering around the room. And for extra measure, just in case that doesn't sound spooky enough, there is a nearby cemetery and an underground crypt you can take an evening stroll over to for even more paranormal activity. But be warned, you never know what other spirits could be lurking in the shadows there.
Number 10. Humber College Lakeshore Campus. Oh, Humber, my former college. Shout out to the Acting for Film and Television program and television writing and producing programs. Now, if you've ever been to Humber, you know that the campus is haunted. The Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital was in operation on what is now Humber College's Lakeshore grounds from 1890 to 1979. Now, there's been ghosts sighted there, and it's a nurse. She was apparently having an affair with a patient, and then for some reason she chose to hang herself on the apple tree in the orchard, Humber Business School professor Steve Bang said. In the cottage area of the college, specifically Building G, is haunted. The nurse was spotted in many cases in G Building, which is where people used to see her through the windows at night until the windows were boarded up. And I will say, Building G always gave me the creeps. Also, there's tunnels underground connecting all the buildings, and it's said that's how nurses transfer patients around the grounds. Now, I remember when I first found the door to the tunnel, my friend Summer and I were so confused, as you can see here. Now, they also use the tunnels to film famous TV shows and movies like Suicide Squad, which is pretty cool. Also, I think my dorm my first year was haunted as I heard knocking coming from inside my closet, our lights flickered 24/7, and I always felt like someone was watching me. Number 9. Fairmont Royal York. Right across from Union Station, this hotel is full of history. Now, there are 5 main hauntings here. The first is in regards to the Fairmont Royal York's Crystal Ballroom, or should I say the former Crystal Ballroom. The Fairmont's Crystal Ballroom was closed down permanently because it violated a number of fire codes. However, since the closure of the ballroom, many people who have stayed in the rooms directly underneath say they hear noises such as music and talking coming from the floor above. Now, it's also said that the elevator will sometimes take you up to the ballroom floor without anyone ever pushing the button. The second haunting is of a former banquet porter who was found hanging in the stairwell of the 19th floor, an area where the meeting rooms are held. Once in a while, staff report seeing the porter's upper body float around the 19th floor. The third haunting / unexplained event is the sound of children laughing and running up and down the halls. Many guests have complained about children, but many also admit to opening their doors and seeing an empty hallway. Then there's a man on the 8th floor who roams around wearing a purple jacket. However, that is all that is known about this ghostly figure. And finally, there are stories that a very wealthy man visited the hotel with his new bride, and himself and her now both lurk around the hotel at night. He mostly dwells in the stairwells, but the bride can be found in the room she stayed that night. Number 8. The Keg Mansion. Now a restaurant, this house once belonged to the Masseys. Lillian was the only daughter of Hart Massey, and she died in 1915 while living in today's Keg Mansion house. According to the legend, the tragedy of Lillian's maid happened just after her death. The maid was downstairs as a dying Lillian lay in her bed, and when the doctor announced that she had died, it said that the maid was witnessed walking out to the main hall, up the stairs to the oval vestibule, and she fashioned a noose, wrapping one end to the wood railing. She hoisted herself up and over the side. House guests found her swinging above the foyer right near the grand staircase. Now most believe her death was due to grief, and over the years numerous guests and staff have allegedly seen the maid's body dangling over the stairs and then disappearing. Guests have also reportedly seen ghostly children playing throughout the restaurant, and the second floor washroom is said to be haunted as well. Number 7. Gibraltar Point Lighthouse. Built in 1808, the Gibraltar Point Lighthouse is reportedly home to the ghost of its first keeper, John Paul Reddell Muller. He was known to keep a keg of beer on hand at his cottage to share with friends. Just north of the lighthouse was a blockhouse guarded by soldiers from Fort York. The soldiers would often row down from Blockhouse Bay to visit him, and legend has it that back in 1815 when 3 soldiers were visiting, John cut them off since he thought they already had enough to drink. A deadly brawl broke out and John mysteriously vanished. No one knew what happened to him, and the story of his disappearance was passed down, and several decades later the 4th lighthouse keeper, George Duran, found human remains buried beneath the ground near the lighthouse on Toronto Island. Now today, visitors ascending the lighthouse have claimed to see ghostly shadows and felt the floor rumble beneath their feet. Number 6. Mackenzie House. William Lyon Mackenzie was the first mayor of Toronto, and in 1837 he led a rebellion to overthrow British rule. Now Mackenzie moved into the Bond Street home in 1859 and he died there in 1961. Mackenzie's wife Isabel died 12 years later, and in the 1950s live-in caretakers worked and lived at the Mackenzie House, and it was a story by Miss Edmund that eventually made newspaper headlines. Miss Edmund one night claimed that she was awoken by a soft touch on the shoulder. When she opened her eyes, Miss Edmund said there was a lady there bending over her, looking into her face, but a few seconds later the lady vanished. Now a few weeks later, Miss Edmund claims it happened again, but this time she said the lady drew back her hand and slapped her in the face before vanishing, as a source has said. Then in the 1960s, a type of exorcism took place in the house, and it's recorded to air on television, which made the museum an even bigger draw for fans of supernatural phenomena. A woman's ghost has also been seen roaming the hallways, phantom footsteps have been heard, and a basement printing press is said to start up all on its own. In 1960, this house was donated to the city of Toronto, and you can take tours of it today. Number 5. St. Michael's Hospital. St. Michael's Hospital was established by the Sisters of St. Joseph in 1892, and one nun is still reportedly making her rounds to this day. The hospital is famous for tales of Sister Vincenza or Sister Vinnie. Sister Vincenza worked at the hospital for 28 years as the nursing supervisor of obstetrics and died in 1958. Since 1965, visitors and staff have described encounters with Sister Vincenza, which often include her rearranging medication, giving blankets to new mothers, and turning lights on and off. However, it turns out that Sister Vinnie isn't alone in haunting this medical center. According to the hospital's records, there have been a ton of different ghostly experiences, many of which do not match the description of Sister Vinnie. There's also said to be a spirit in the back filing room of the hospital's medical records office. Possessed elevators, rearranged medication, and flashing lights are other things that go on here. Number 4. Queen's Park. The legislative building at Queen's Park has been operating since 1860, and the grounds on which it sits have been used since at least 1830. As one of the oldest urban parks in Canada, it's no surprise that the building is haunted. Now before the construction of the legislative complex, the University Hospital for the Insane was built on this property, dating back to 1842. Now today, there are multiple ghosts. The White Lady wanders the halls, appearing with a long white flowing robe and long hair. Now the maiden wears a checkered dress with an apron which she holds over her face to conceal her features, and the most gruesome is the hanging woman who dangles from a hook in the long tunnel in the basement. Also, an apparition of a soldier in full regimental dress was spotted appearing angry as he descended the grand staircase of the main hall. Many visitors have reported sightings of a ghostly female figure, sometimes alone and sometimes in small groups of 4. And one of them is known to be malevolent, and overall it's just a spooky place. Number 3. The Don Jail. The original building was completed in 1864 and was reopened in 2000 2013 to serve as the administrative wing of the Bridgepoint Active Healthcare, a rehabilitation hospital located adjacent to the jail. Now, the jail originally had a capacity of 184 inmates and was separated into an east wing for the men and a west wing for the women. The jail is known for its overcrowding, inhumane living conditions, and public hangings. Abandoned Spaces reports that 60 people were hanged at the jail, and several were buried in unmarked graves on its grounds. The ghosts of the executed prisoners are said to roam the site to this day, including that of a blonde woman who hanged herself in the woman's block. Number 2. The Elgin and Winter Garden Theater Center. Built in 1913, originally called Lowe's Young Street Theater, the historic venue is not only home to 2 theaters, but also a few spirits. Now, the Elgin and Winter Garden Theater Center, its most famous ghost is the Lavender Lady. While no one knows who she is, there's speculation that she could be a rival actress of a jealous castmate, or perhaps a jilted wife whose husband fell in love with a showgirl. When she makes her appearance, it is in the grand staircase and elevator area. Those who have felt her presence notice a drop in temperature and the scent of lavender. She's also been known to call one of the 1930 manually operated cage elevators when she doesn't feel like taking the stairs. However, when the elevator door opens, the operator finds no one there except for a cool breeze and the fragrance of lavender flowers. Now, another ghost here is Sam. In 1989, after the building restoration was complete, 3 volunteers and staff heard a trombone or trumpet playing. Another odd occurrence was when the seats in the theater were flipping down and then back up. The volunteers used a Ouija board to conduct a seance at midnight on the stage of the theater, and the group communicated with a musician named Sam, and he said he was a trombone player in a 1918 vaudeville production at the Winter Garden. And coming in at number 1 is Casa Loma. Casa Loma is a Gothic revival castle-style mansion and garden that is now a historic house museum and landmark. It was constructed from 1911 to 1914 as a residence for financier Sir Henry Pellet. Now, this place is absolutely beautiful, but there are some ghost stories surrounding this magnificent castle. The White Lady is someone who is believed to be a maid who worked here in the early 1900s, around the time when 60,000 people in Toronto died of influenza. She's been seen in a lot of places by guests or by cleaning or cafeteria staff as they've been cleaning up at the end of the day. Some have also reported sightings of Sir Henry Pellet and his wife Lady Mary Pellet. The tunnel leading to the castle's stables is another place where the most notorious ghost is believed to roam. Many have reported feeling as though they had been grabbed or had their hair pulled in the tunnel. People have also reported hearing the spirit in the tunnel sighing gruffly, as he has even been captured in recordings, speaking and interacting with visitors. In one recording, he is heard mimicking a medium who said, "Oh, he's a horrible person," while trying to make contact. Now, I've been here before and that tunnel is scary, so it doesn't surprise me that some ghosts lurk there. People also hear disembodied voices and feel touched by someone who's not there at all. Coming in at number 10 is Monte Cristo Homestead. Monte Cristo Homestead is a historic homestead that was constructed by local pioneer Christopher William Crawley in 1885. It's a double-story late Victorian style manor standing on a hill overlooking the town. While it belonged to the Crawleys, it was riddled with death as a stable boy burnt to death, a girl was thrown down the stairs, a maid lobbed off a balcony, and a caretaker was shot dead, amongst others, so of course this place is haunted. Current owner Olive Ryan says, "I've had a hand on my shoulder, I've had my name called when I've been here by myself, I've heard footsteps on the balcony and gone out and there's no one there." And now all of this started just 2 days after moving in, when she saw from a distance beaming bright lights coming from the home, which at the time was only lit by one kerosene lamp. The lights were gone by the time the car made it down the long driveway, she said. Other reported experiences include a medium who was struck in the head, a young girl's separate asthma attack-like episode despite no medical history, several strange occurrences involving animals, and multiple reports of presences, footsteps, and voices from the boarders, visitors, and family members. Number 9. Devil's Pool. According to Aboriginal folklore, a young runaway bride who fell to her death at Devil's Pool is believed to be the reason why so many young men's lives, especially male tourists, have been taken at the site. The legend begins with a young woman named Ulana who married an elder from her own tribe. Yet shortly after they married, she fell in love with another man, Daiga, from a touring tribe. Now it's said that the two lovers, Ulana and Daiga, ran away from their tribes and fled to what is now known as Devil's pool, where they were captured by the elders. Yet Ulana broke free and leapt into the creek waters, calling for Daiga to follow. She hit the water, crying out for her love Daiga, which shook the water into action. The land vibrated around her, sending boulders flying into the creek and causing the water to plunge forward at alarming rates. Note said if you listen closely, it's thought you can still hear Ulana's cries for her lost love, according to the indigenous legend. Her curse on the spookily named Devil's Pool, also known as Babinda Boulders in tropical North Queensland, has lingered ever since. Ulana is said to have lured 17 men to a watery grave in the past half-century, remembered with the eerie saying, "He came for a visit and stayed forever." Now, if I were a man, I would not risk going here. Number 8. Quarantine Station. Set up as a vital safeguard in 1833 to prevent immigrants arriving in Australia from spreading diseases to the main settlement in the city, many migrants spent their final days at the compound before succumbing to deadly viruses. Officially, close to 600 people died at the station out of the 26,000 who stayed there between the quarantine site being founded in the 1830s and its closure in the 1980s. Now, the site now operates as a luxury hotel resort, but it is extremely haunted. Hundreds of spirit encounters have occurred over the years, varying from apparitions, people suddenly feeling nauseated and unwell, to objects being moved without any explanation. Several nurses, as well as a spirit known as matron, are said to patrol the hospital ward, while a mortician in a top hat, nicknamed by staff as Mr. Slimy, has been spotted walking around the grounds. A fisherman from China called Mr. Chen often roams around the third-class living quarters, where passengers who were not of a white descent had to live while at the compound. Now, around 20 children are said to haunt the site, but a little boy called Isaac Lowe's is one of the more frequent spirits to be seen. Number 7. Old Helensburgh Railway Tunnel. Sitting just south of Sydney is Old Helensburgh Railway Tunnel, said to be the home of a ghost of a miner, Robert Hales, who died in 1895. He'd been walking home along the short 80-meter long tunnel after a long day at work. A steam train raced along the tracks from behind and hit the hapless miner. The force of the impact was so great that his body was ripped in two, with each half scattered meters apart. Now, as far as the legend goes, the ghost of Mr. Hales still haunts the tunnel as a mischievous spirit, chases after trains, and even runs through tourists. A lot of people say they had experienced weird stuff in there, seeing things, sensations, someone watching them, a ghost tour guide, Craig Bloxham said. Number 6. Picton. Being the most haunted town in Australia, Picton is also known for its countryside views and paranormal gardens. The town is located about 80 kilometers southwest of Sydney and has had a historical significance due to its buildings and railway tunnels. The Mushroom Tunnel, also known as former Red Bank Range Railway, is a haunted tunnel, as the stories say that there was a terrible railway accident involving a woman named Emily Bollard. The reports suggest people often witness Emily and 2 other women ghosts, and also hear some scary voices, crying, and shrieks. Many people have also reported a sudden drop of temperature, eerie shadows, a gust of winds, orbs, body chills, and many weird happenings inside the tunnel. Number 5. Princess Theatre. In the late 1880s, a local opera singer named Fred Baker, seeing failure in his performances, renamed himself as Federici and posed as a European singer. After this, people started flocking to theaters to hear this exotic singer. Now, in March 1888, while he was completing a show at the Princess Theatre, Federici hit a high note as he was descending on the stage on a platform. It was at this time that he had a heart attack and died on the spot. His death was witnessed by a stagehand. When the other actors found out about his abrupt death, they were shocked, as they swore he had been on stage with them after the final curtain to bask in applause sometime after he had already died. Since then, it's rumored that the theater is haunted by his ghost, and there have been numerous reported sightings of Federici's ghost over the years by performers and staff. Now, rather than trying to expel him from the theater, it was tradition to reserve him a seat in the theater's third row so he can watch the performances amongst the audience. Number 4. National Film and Sound Archive. Before it was the National Film and Sound Archive, this building was the Australian Institute of Anatomy, where it housed hundreds of human skeletons and body parts and animal specimens, including Farlap's heart, Ned Kelly's skull, and a mummy from Papua New Guinea. Staff in recent years have witnessed objects moving by themselves and weird noises coming from recording booths, which once served as dissection labs. The foyer of the building is lined with 9 busts of famous Australians. Now, Now when these Australians will pop out as an apparition from time to time, it's said that people will be out in the building in the late afternoon and they see an outline of an elderly man, dressed well, and he comes out of the wall near where his ashes are. Now he doesn't move much and then suddenly sucks back into where the ashes are behind the wall. Number 3. Fremantle Prison. Originally known as the Convict Establishment, the Fremantle Prison was built by convicts between 1852 and 1859 using limestone quarried on site. During its period of operation, the prison housed the majority of the state's thieves and rogues as well as people who ended others' lives, and during both world wars it was used by the Australian Army as a military prison for prisoners of war. In its time as a jail, 44 people were executed at its gallows. Now just one of them was a woman, Martha Rendell. Martha was convicted of ending the lives of 3 of her offspring, and legend has it that her face occasionally appears in the chapel window. Now the sound of rattling keys, disembodied footsteps, and voices haunt the building as well, as any visitors who take pictures with the gallows tend to appear headless when they look at it after. Now cameras tend to fail, there are orbs and strange light anomalies, flying bin lids, and funny smells. Several guards claim to have seen the apparition of a man in black, and one of them even fainted when he laid eyes on the figure. Now no one knows who he is or why he's there, and that is just terrifying. Number 2. Central Railway Station. While tens of thousands of commuters may pass through Central Station as they make their way to work every day, deep beneath the platforms is a hidden world. Abandoned tunnels snake underground and have sat unused for decades. Stripped bare but largely still intact, platforms 26 and 27 were built in the 1970s on the site of the old Devonshire Street Cemetery. The bodies laying in the graveyard were reburied across the city decades before the station was built, but workers recently inspecting the unused platform have reported some eerie experiences. Sydney train officials have reported hearing voices echoing against the walls, and even the sounds of children playing. Director of Operations with Sydney Trains Tony Eade also claims to have heard the sound of children's voices on a visit to station's never-used tunnels. He previously said workers down here said they would hear kids playing and, thinking they were vandals, would go and investigate. On one occasion I was down here with a radio crew and we all heard children playing. Take that as you wish, but we all heard it. And coming in at number 1 is Arundel Mental Hospital. Arundel Mental Hospital was an Australian psychiatric hospital where construction began in 1864 and was opened for patients in 1867. Now with a building this old and with walls that have seen so many horrors, it is not a shock that this place is haunted. It was finally closed as an asylum in 1993, and at its height, Arundel had 1,000 patients and is a large complex with up to 70 interesting historic abandoned buildings. While reports exist of apparitions, phantom sounds, visitors experiencing nausea, fainting, and pain, some ghosts from Arundel's past have made themselves known to those who are alive today. Now J Ward is one of the most haunted places, as visitors report feeling ill and suddenly afraid. Others slip into a trance, only released from it when they exit the building. Some people have even been bitten or pushed while walking through J Ward, and the ward is also said to be haunted by 3 prisoners who were hanged and buried on the property. They are said to be restless because they weren't given a proper burial, and their graves are only marked with 3 scratches on the prison wall. Apparitions have also been seen in the women's ward donning old-time nurses' uniforms and disappearing into stone walls.
And we're starting off the list with La Noria in Chile. La Noria was a town located in the barren desert of Atacama. That's right, we have a ghost town on here, folks. A destination for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts from across the world. Maybe some of you are one of them. It used to be a mining town in the 1800s, but by the early 1900s, most of the residents had packed up and left, leaving their now crumbling homes and buildings behind. Now the people who lived there led tough lives. They worked constantly, the climate was harsh, many of them died suddenly, and life expectancy was not high. This is perhaps why the cemetery is said to be the most haunted part of the abandoned town. I guess cemeteries are pretty much the most haunted places anywhere you go, though, to be fair. Visiting there now, you'll see many coffins just out in the open, with skeletons just sitting there for you to see, bones scatter the area, and this is because there was a lot of looting in the area after the town was abandoned, and some say that at night the souls of the deceased, angered by the tampering of their graves, rise from their graves. Yeah, I gotta go there. Just the 112th place I have on my list since I started making these videos. Next up, we have the Vampire of Pisco. Now, looking at images of this Peruvian town, I just gotta start by saying, looks lovely. I would definitely visit, but just be warned, you could run into the ghost of a vampire lady if you're not careful. So our story story actually begins in England in 1913, where a woman named Sarah Ellen Roberts had been executed for being a witch. Some say she had even been bitten by Dracula himself and was one of his wives, a vampire witch. That's one dangerous woman. Right before her death, she warned that she would return from her grave in 80 years to exact vengeance. The Church of England believed her corpse to be too cursed to bury on holy ground, so her actual husband, not Dracula, sadly, a man by the name of John Roberts, probably the most average, uninteresting, basic name possible, decided to take her body elsewhere. And John traveled all across Europe. No one would have her. He tried Chile, Argentina, with no luck until his quest eventually landed him in Piso, Peru, where he finally lay her to rest. In 2007, there was a massive earthquake in the town, and one of the few tombs left untouched, Sarah Ellen Roberts. A number of Pisco residents say that on some nights you can still see a ghostly woman wandering the streets. Number 8. The Encantado. The mythical creature is said to stalk the forests of the Amazon, residing in the river. But sometimes they come out at night, often shape-shifting into human form. Their real form is that of a serpent or dolphin-like appearance. They're very attracted to parties or social gatherings, especially if there's music. The Encantado are said to be exceptional musicians in human form, hypnotizing their victims with their musical abilities. Once it has its target in its grasp, it whisks them away, dragging them into the waters of the Amazon, never to be seen or heard from again. If it doesn't decide to take them away, though, these creatures are also known to incite madness or cause illness and death to their victims. So, if you do decide to visit the Amazon and cruise down the majestic river, just be cautious if you happen to come across a beautiful stranger in the dead of night with incredible musical talent. Next on the list, we have the Recoleta Cemetery in Argentina. This Buenos Aires cemetery has quite the storied history, with several notable Argentines having been buried there. One of the more harrowing tales of Rufina Cambaceres, who met a gruesome end at the cemetery. Honestly, this is one of my absolute worst fears. Rufina had a privileged life. She was born into a wealthy family. She was popular. She really lived it up. But unfortunately, it was short-lived. In 1902, she suddenly collapsed and was pronounced dead at only 19 years of age. She was placed in a coffin and she was sealed at a mausoleum at this cemetery. But just a few days after her funeral, a graveyard worker was in her crypt and noticed that her coffin was slightly ajar. As to why he was in the crypt, I don't really know. I don't know what crypt keepers do. I tried to look it up. All I got were descriptions of the 90s Crypt Keeper series. Great show, but not really what I'm looking for, so let me know in the comments if you know. Anyway, the man opened her coffin and to his horror saw that there were scratch marks on it. Rufina had been buried alive, essentially. Some say that her shadowy figure still roams through this cemetery at night. Number 6, the Rosario Mine. This mine, located in the Cerro Rico mountain in Potosi, Bolivia, is exceptionally dangerous. For centuries, miners have descended into the bowels of the earth, braving treacherous conditions in search of silver and other valuable minerals. The working environment is pretty harsh, with cramped and unstable tunnels, limited ventilation, and this constant threat of collapse. Miners work long hours, physically demanding labor, often exposed to harmful dust and toxic fumes, leading to health issues and a shortened life expectancy if they don't die in the mine. Over the centuries, millions of miners have met their end here, but despite all that, the nature of the job continues today, and with all the deaths that have taken place there, it's no surprise that many of the miners believe it to be haunted by the spirits of those who perished in its depths. And many of them claim to have experienced eerie and unexplainable phenomenon in the dark confines of this mine. Miners often pay homage to El Tío, the god of the underworld, whose altar sits at the entrance to the mine. Miners offer cigarettes, alcohol, cocoa leaves to El Tío in hopes of receiving protection and good fortune. And at number 5, we have the Huelma building in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Today, the Huelma building stands, but it's the site of a very tragic incident which took place in 1974, one of the deadliest high-rise fires in history. It was a morning like any other until an air conditioner on the 12th floor short-circuited, engulfing the entire floor in flames, which quickly spread to the rest of the building. Within 20 minutes, the entire building was on fire. Firemen rushed to the scene, but Tragically, their ladders could only reach the 15th floor, so everyone above all burnt to death in the flames. And when the dust settled, it was determined that an estimated 179 people lost their lives. While making their way through the torched building, authorities found 13 bodies trapped in the elevator. They had been burnt so badly that they were completely unrecognizable and were never identified. Their bodies were buried in the São Pedro cemetery, and some tell stories of hearing moans and cries of agony coming from their unmarked graves. Number 4, Paso Alberti stations in Buenos Aires. The A line in Buenos Aires is the oldest subway in Latin America, completed in 1913. Building the line was a massive undertaking that tragically claimed the lives of many workers there, including Salvador Vaca and Antonio Salas, who were Italian immigrants whose deaths were initially hidden as accidents, but later revealed to be due to pure negligence. Some think that their spirits, along with others who met their ends during the construction, wander through the tracks at night. Some have reported hearing footsteps and catching glimpses of these ghoulish faces passing by the windows as the train speeds down the tunnels. People claim to see white translucent figures in the dark tunnels of these abandoned tracks, and some workers have even witnessed security cameras mysteriously turning off at night only to capture this eerie white figure when turned back on. Phantom Bride in her white gown is said to kind of roam the tunnels, and it leads to speculation that maybe she was abandoned at the altar or met a tragic fate on her wedding day, perhaps throwing herself onto the tracks. Who knows? Number 3, we have the Castillo San Cristobal in San Juan, Puerto Rico. This one has something of a tragic love story behind it. That's exactly what it is. This military base was built by the Spanish during the Inquisition. The executioner at the base had a daughter, Maria Dolores, who ended up falling in love with a thief named Bentoncourt. Bentoncourt was eventually arrested for his crimes and sentenced to death, and who executed the man? Maria's very own father, of course. And Maria was unaware of her lover's death until she discovered his remains in the gallows one day. She was so heartbroken and devastated that she ended up taking her own life right there and then. It's said that the lover's spirits still haunt this former military base till this very day. And coming in at our number 2 spot, I'm sure you've all heard of this one, the Island of Dolls in Mexico City. And yes, Mexico, not technically South America, alright, but it's close. Plus, is there anything more unsettling to look at than a doll? Maybe multiple dolls. Now hang them all from trees in a forest. No surprise why this is one of the most famous creepy locations on the planet. The Island of Dolls in Mexico City's Xochimilco canals, it's a pretty eerie sight. It's covered with dolls hanging from trees and scattered about. It's their dead eyes and messed up faces. Story goes that a man named Don Julian Santana Barrera started hanging the dolls in order to appease the spirit of a drowned girl they found in the canal. Lots of people think that the island is now haunted. They say the dolls move their heads, whisper, and make spooky sounds. The Island of Dolls has become quite a tourist attraction. Some say the place feels like you're being watched by these ghostly forces. And finally, we have the Casa Matusita. Lima's Casa Matusita is a haunted residence that instills fear in people for a pretty good reason. It's got some dark history that dates back to Peru's colonial period, when a woman of Persian descent became its first notable resident. Accused of witchcraft during the Spanish Inquisition, she was sentenced to death and cursed the land before burning at the stake. And so things only got worse when a wealthy and cruel landlord built a large home on this cursed plot of land. He mistreated his staff, and he unknowingly pushed them to seek revenge during a high-profile dinner party. The staff spiked guests' drinks with hallucinogenic, but their prank kind of backfired tragically when the guests started brutally massacring each other. Decades later, the Matusita family moved in, setting up a business on the first floor, and a violent incident occurred when Mr. Matusita discovered his wife in bed with another dude, causing the man to snap, take the life of his wife, her lover, and finally himself.
Coming in at number 10 is Goatman's Bridge, USA. Goatman's Bridge is more formally known as the Old Alton Bridge in Argyle. Now dating back to the 1930s, locals have told tales of the specter of a strange half-man, half-goat creature lurking beneath the bridge. The Goatman is said to stand over 7 feet tall with big horns and glowing red eyes, which to me just sounds like the devil, but I mean, hey, Goatman is a cool name. Now some believe the Goatman remains dormant for years at a time and awakes only to hunt for prey. Now, the Goatman isn't the only spirit on this bridge, as to keep him company is another spirit, that of a young mother crying out eternally for her lost child. Residents making their way over the bridge late at night have reported hearing her ghostly wails. Now, some say the two ghosts are connected, and that years ago, the Goatman stole the young woman's child, and when she found out, she threw herself from the bridge, and her spirit has haunted it ever since. Now, ghostly figures and strange lights are also said to appear in the surrounding woods, as well as reports of visitors being touched, grabbed, and having rocks thrown at them. Now, I already don't like bridges because of heights and being over bodies of water, but being on a haunted bridge with a ghost called the Goatman? No thank you. Number 9. Diplomat Hotel, Philippines. The Dominican Hill Retreat House was built in 1913 atop a hill in the famed Philippine city of Pines. With the outbreak of World War II, it became a camp for refugees escaping the Japanese army, but was eventually invaded. It was once occupied by refugees, nuns, and soldiers, but was bombed by the American Armed Forces. People were taken advantage of and mistreated, tormented, and had their heads cut off. In the 1970s, the war-torn building was converted to the sophisticated and beautiful Diplomat Hotel, but the hotel was shut down by the 80s and left abandoned. The deserted, deteriorating building became infamous for being one of the most haunted ruins in the country. Currently, the old hotel is now under rehabilitation by the national government as a heritage and nature park, but many people have seen headless apparitions at night and reported hearing screams, cries, banging on doors, and other strange and desperate noises. Some believe the building is haunted by the restless spirits of its grim history. It's even considered by ghost believers to be a ghost magnet due to all the tragedy here. Number 8. Castle of Good Hope, South Africa. Castle of Good Hope in Cape Town, South Africa was built in the 17th century by the Dutch East India Company. It's the country's oldest colonial building, originally serving as a replenishment station for ships passing the treacherous waters of the Cape. The first reported paranormal occurrence was when the apparition of a tall gentleman was seen in 1915 on one of the castle's ramparts. The man wasn't seen again until 1947, when he was seen regularly over 2 weeks. He would often be seen jumping off the side of one of the castle walls and walking between the basins. One of the most popular stories associated with the castle involves the former governor Peter Guybers van Noot. He died on April 23, 1728, the same day he had sentenced 7 soldiers to death after they were caught trying to desert the military. It's believed one of the soldiers placed a curse on him and demanded he come watch the execution, which he didn't. Later that day, Peter was found dead, slumped over his desk with a look of terror on his face. Now, another famous haunting is the Lady in Grey. She has been witnessed running through the castles, holding her face and crying hysterically. However, since a woman's body was found during recent excavations, her ghost hasn't been reported. Then sometimes in the 1700s, a soldier was found dangling from the bell rope in the bell tower, which overlooked the entrance of the castle. After his death, the bell tower was sealed off. However, the bell has been known to strike off its own accord to this day. There's also the ghost of a black dog who has been known to pounce on unsuspecting visitors, then vanish into thin air. Now that is so spooky. Number 7. The Forbidden City, China. No trip to Beijing is complete without a visit to the Forbidden City, China, former imperial palace that now serves as a museum. But you might not know that the popular tourist destination has quite the reputation among supernatural enthusiasts. During its 600-year tenure as a palace, the complex had its fair share of deaths, whether from jealous concubines poisoning one another or executions performed at the emperor's behest. Needless to say, there have been many reports of strange phenomena since the palace opened to the public in the 1940s. The most common story involved a woman dressed in white while strolling around the grounds and sobbing, flute music being heard during the dark hours of the night from the empty city, and ghost dogs have been seen running through the narrow corridors at the edges of the labyrinth that is the Forbidden City. Number 6. Lawang Sewu, Indonesia. Lawang Sewu, meaning Thousand Doors, was built in 1917 by the Dutch East Indian Railway Company. During World War II, the Japanese occupied Indonesia and the Japanese forces took over Lawang Sewu. When the Dutch retook Semarang in October 1945 at the Battle of Semarang, Dutch soldiers used the tunnel underneath a building to sneak into the city. A struggle ensued and numerous Indonesian soldiers died as well as 5 employees. Now, the basement of B building was used as a prison where many people were treated harshly, with many of them being executed. Due to this, Lawang Seru is believed to be one of the most haunted places in Indonesia. Among the many ghosts that have been reported here, the most popular and often cited spirit is the Dutch woman. She had ended her own life there and was captured on film during a TV program. Headless spirits are also known to wander its corridors and grounds, and the basement of the B building is believed to be haunted by a kuntilanak, I hope I said that right, which is a vampiric, vengeful female spirit. Number 5. Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, Canada. Ever since it was completed in 1888, this hotel has been associated with paranormal activity. One of the most famous legends is of the ghost bride who on her wedding day, decked out in her wedding gown, descended one of the hall's marble staircases. Something startled her, causing her to slip and fall, and she died on those steps. Since then, the hotel staff and guests alike have reported seeing a veiled figure moving up and down the stairs, or seeing a figure in a wedding dress dancing in the ballroom upstairs, pining for the first dance with her husband that she never had. Stories of Sam McCulley, a genial old Scotsman who was a head bellman during the 60s and 70s, have been circulating around the hotel since his passing in 1975. Supposedly, Sam is a helpful sort of spirit, and most stories involve him mention some service he's provided to staff or guests. There are also haunted rooms, as guests have reported having pillows yanked from under their heads while they slept, or even being pushed off the bed by some unseen entity. In another room, an entire family had their life ended there, and ever since, guests in that room have reported being awakened by screaming, and when they turned on the lights, they would see bloody handprints on the mirror. Number 4. Dow Hill, India. Tourists who have visited the hill station of Darjeeling might not know about this. Dow Hill is a lesser known haunted place in India and has ghost fables connected to it. A small stretch of the road between Dow Hill and the forest office is called Death Road, which obviously means it's haunted. A young headless boy has been spotted by woodcutters who see him walk down the road and disappear into the woods. Not only this, but people also feel like they're being followed and watched by a woman with gray clothes. Locals have also spotted a red eye staring at them too. Some people have even gone mad, and some even ended their own lives after going into this forest. Now, forests in general are just creepy, and with all this going on, I would be staying away. And to make matters worse, there is a haunted boys' school near the woods, which is haunted as well. Locals feel a similar vibe to the forest near this school, and loud whispering and footsteps have been heard between December to March as it is closed during this time. Number 3. Hellfire Club, Ireland. The Hellfire in Dublin was built as a hunting lodge where Dublin elites used to gather in the 1700s. The ruins of the club are located on top of the Montpelier Hill overlooking the adjacent Massey Woods. Now, the secrecy surrounding the club led to speculation that its members were Satanists and devil worshippers. The president was named the King of Hell and dressed like Satan with horns, wings, and hooves. The members were also said to set a place at each meeting for the devil and hope that he'd attend. Now, there have been numerous stories about black masses, animals, and even human sacrifice rituals happening in the Hellfire Club, but that's not all. The best known Hellfire Club story is one in which the devil himself appears. According to a legend, a stranger joined the club members at a game of cards. Then, when one of the players dropped a card on the floor, he bent down to retrieve it and saw that the stranger had cloven hooves instead of feet. Another common visitor is the ghost of a young lady who is believed to have been burned inside a barrel and rolled down the hill. Number 2. Akasha's Fortress, Norway. This medieval castle served as a defensive stronghold for the city of Oslo, and it is rumored to be the most haunted place in Norway. For many years, parts of the castle served as a prison for some of Norway's most notorious criminals. The sentence often involved grueling physical labor, and the prison was infamous for using irons, chains, and prisoner isolation as disciplinary techniques. It closed as a prison in 1950, but over the years, there have been numerous reports of whispers and scratching along the fortress halls, and many guards have reported weird experiences, like the sensation of being pushed while being alone on duty. Many visitors and employees claim to have experienced something they cannot declare. Most of the paranormal occurrences are the common phenomena. People hear footsteps, disembodied voices, and smell strange smells, but there are some claims that have been around for centuries. The most popular sightings include a demon dog named Malkazian, who is said to guard the gates of the castle. But if you are bitten by this dog, you are bound to die within 3 months, and of course in a very unhappy and painful way. And for decades, people claim to have seen a woman appear from the darkness wearing a long dark cloak that has no face. Creepy. And coming in at number 1 is the Tower of London, England. With a history of torment and execution going back over 900 years, the Tower of London is regarded by many as one of the most haunted places in the UK. It was originally built in 1008 by William the Conqueror and has served as a significant role in the history of England ever since. There have been many reports of the paranormal at the Tower of London over the years. The most famous of all ghosts that live within its walls is Anne Boleyn Ghost, the wife of King Henry VIII. She was beheaded in 1536, and her headless body has been seen walking around the tower's corridors and often near the spot of her demise. Other full body apparitions have also been seen, including Lady Jane Grey, spotted by a guardsman in 1957. Now, one of the most notable ghosts is that of what is believed to be 2 young princes. They have been witnessed throughout the rooms of the castle, as they're often seen in nightgowns, holding hands with a look of terror on their faces. It is believed that these are 2 former princes who were sent to the tower after they were deemed illegitimate by Parliament. They vanished one day, and it was assumed that their lives were ended by the order of their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester. To corroborate this, 2 small skeletons were exhumed beneath the staircase in the White Tower.
And we're starting off this list with 300 Kim Ma Street in Hanoi, Vietnam. This compound has sat abandoned for over 30 years, and it's said to be one of the most haunted houses in the entire city. There are all kinds of tales surrounding the place. People have claimed to see objects move on their own, semi-translucent or shadowy figures have been seen lurking about, and in the dead of night, ghostly screams are often heard from within the walls. This picture here has made the rounds for a while. As you can see, there's a man standing in front of the gate of the property, and in the background, you can clearly see what looks to be a ghostly figure in a white robe lurking behind him. Now, is this actually just a person who is very much alive, roaming through the abandoned property in a long white robe? At night, possibly, but there could also be a ghost afoot. Number 9, the Yongdok House in South Korea. If you ever find yourself in South Korea and feel like taking a spooky trip, you can visit this abandoned house. It's about a 3-hour high-speed train ride from Seoul, but you just might meet a ghost or 10, so maybe it's worth it for you. Plus, apparently you can just roam around for free. The Yongdok House is the final resting place of hundreds of soldiers. Around 700 of them died on this land during the Korean War, and of course their spirits are still said to haunt the property. As it turns out, the soldiers are all buried there. The home was built on a mass grave. Every owner who lived in the house experienced terrible misfortune. Not only did they encounter these tortured spirits, but they each met untimely deaths. Word got out about how seemingly cursed this home was, and nobody wanted to live there. It was eventually abandoned at some point in the 80s. Next up, we have the Edmonton Haunted House. Now, I'm not clear as to the name of the owner of this house or the exact location, only that it is or was in Edmonton. This is an old story dating back to 1909. The owner would rent the house out, but they had a hard time securing regular tenants, as each person who stayed there would rush out of the home, oftentimes in well under a month. An article at the time is quoted as saying, "From time to time, parties of different nationalities have approached the owner of the house and rented it, sometimes for a year, other times only for a few months. But generally, at the expiration of a few hours, they disappeared, bag and baggage, without even calling up the owner for a refund of the monies paid. The owner and his agent unaware of their departure until the next month's rent was due." Tenants would experience horrific paranormal activity in the home, with one story going that a tenant had locked himself in his room with furniture pressed up against the door, and yet somehow the door opened on its own, and from the dark hallway beyond, he heard a terrible disembodied groaning sound. Another story goes that an Asian businessman had rented out the home with 4 of his workers. They were planning to operate a laundry business from the home. They didn't even make it through the first night and fled from the home in the middle of the night, returning in the morning to collect their belongings. And at number 7, we have the Whaley House. Thomas Whaley began constructing this beautiful San Diego home in 1856, having proclaimed, "My new house, when completed, will be the handsomest, most comfortable and convenient place in town, or within 150 miles of here." It sounds like something Donald Trump would say. "My house is going to be the best place We're 150 miles, but it's most comfortable. Everyone's gonna love it. It's gonna be the talk of the town. Anyway, for a long time, it actually was. It wasn't just the Whaley family home. It became the focal point of the entire town. There was a theater, a general store. It was the county courthouse. The San Diego County government rented out a portion of the home for its offices and records. There was a lot going on at this place, but the party started to end when the family began experiencing paranormal activity in the home. They would hear heavy footsteps making their way throughout the hallways at night, ghostly moans coming from throughout the house. They believed it was the spirit of a man named James Yankee Jim Robinson, who had been hanged on the property after stealing a boat. Harsh time to live. Steal a boat, you deserve death, sir. Not long after these paranormal experiences began, one of the daughters, Violet, took her own life, and the Whaleys ended up leaving the home, building a new one downtown. Number 6, the Borley Rectory. Built in 1862 in Essex, this home was once known as the most haunted house in England. It served as a residence for the Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull and his family. Reports of strange occurrences, including unexplained footsteps, mysterious lights, eerie sounds. It began being reported around 1900 when 4 of Henry's daughters claimed to have seen a ghostly nun in the yard. And instead of going inside, like any rational person would do in that situation, they decided to run over and try to talk with her, but the nun started to vanish the closer they got, apparently. And the rectory gained widespread attention when paranormal investigator Harry Price conducted an investigation there in 1929. At this time, there was a different family living in the home who had also started experiencing paranormal activity, like servant bells ringing even though they had all been disconnected. Price's research led to claims of the Borley Nun, a phantom coach, and other ghostly apparitions said to haunt the property. His findings were published in his book, The Most Haunted House in England, further fueling the rectory's haunted reputation, and the stories surrounding the Borley Rectory varied, with tales of tragic events such as a phantom nun and a supposed love affair ending in a unaliving. These stories added to the intrigue and really fed to this belief that this place was just a hotbed of paranormal activity. Number 5, the figure. This next story was posted to Reddit by user u/Kim Jong Funk. It goes like this. When I was in elementary school, I shared a queen-size bed with my older sister and our family dog, a mutt that looked like a short-haired lassie. We'd sleep on the foot of our bed every night. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up one night around midnight and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was entirely in black without any eyes or a face. I tried to wake up my sister, but she rolled over to go back to sleep. My sister must have accidentally kicked the dog, because the dog woke up and raised her head and started growling at the figure at the foot of the bed. The growling then woke up my sister, and she saw the figure and started screaming. When my parents came into the room and turned the light on, nothing was there. To this day, both my sister and I are adamant that we saw a ghost or other demon on our room. We know we weren't crazy either because the dog saw it too. Next up, we have the Lalaurie Mansion. The Lalaurie Mansion in New Orleans has a notorious history dating back to the mid-1800s. Built by Dr. Louis Lalaurie, who lived there with his wife Delphine in 1832. The mansion's dark secrets became public knowledge around 1834. Reports of cruelty and mistreatment of slaves led to a pretty shocking discovery of a torture chamber in the attic, revealing the gruesome reality of their actions, especially on Delphine's part. She was a full-on sadistic, cruel, evil woman. It reminds me a lot of Elizabeth Bathory, but worse, and some of the things that went on here are unimaginable. She would like break her victims' bones repeatedly, just completely deforming them, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. They were complete monsters. Over the years, the mansion gained a reputation, of course, for being haunted, with claims of ghostly apparitions and eerie occurrences going on there. Local legends and ghost stories have attributed the haunting to the tormented spirits of the victims who suffered within its walls. Next on the list, we have the Sally House. The Sally House in Atchison, Kansas now stands completely abandoned due to its rather dark history. Several deaths are known to have taken place in the home, including the home's original owner, Michael Finney, Richard Edwin Finney, William True, Agnes Finney True, and a young girl named Sally, who had collapsed due to a severe abdominal pain. She was brought to the home by her mother so that the town doctor who lived there could tend to her. He determined that she had appendicitis and that there was no time to delay a surgery. He started the surgery before the anesthesia had fully taken effect, and Sally woke up on the operating table when she suddenly died, apparently from shock. Her spirit was said to linger within the home, and years later, 1993, a young couple moved in. They claimed that their dog would bark at random empty spots in the home, especially in the upstairs nursery. Soon the man would begin receiving scratches on his body from an unknown source. The room that was formerly used for operations would become cold at times, and objects would sometimes move on their own. Suffice to say, that couple didn't live there for long, and the home is now used for paranormal investigations, where paranormal occurrences are still reported on to this day. Barry Pomeroy Castle, located in Devon, England. This place has a history dating back to the 15th century. It was originally built by the Pomeroy family, but later came under the ownership of the Seymours, a prominent noble family closely connected to the Tudor royalty. Over the years, the castle witnessed a series of renovations and expansions, but despite its impressive architecture and kind of picturesque setting, I mean, it's a castle, it looks beautiful, Barry Pomeroy Castle has also gained a reputation for being haunted, especially after having been abandoned in the late 17th century. Stories of supernatural occurrences and sightings have been reported on the property. One of the most famous tales involves the White Lady, believed to be the spirit of Margaret Pomeroy, who was allegedly imprisoned by her jealous sister and left to starve to death. Another ghostly figure is said to be the Blue Lady, and this one's really creepy though, because it's the soul of Eleanor Seymour, who reportedly fell to her death from the tower, and the Blue Lady is said to lure unsuspecting men to dangerous parts of the castle, especially the tower, where they'll fall to their death. Some claim to hear unexplained sounds and experience other strange phenomena. Tourists and visitors have reported feelings of unease and the sensation of being watched while exploring the ruins. And finally, we have the Amityville Horror House. Everyone has heard that name before. There have been tons of horror movies and books based on the goings-on in this house, and the tales surrounding it have become pretty famous in American folklore. For starters, 23-year-old Ron DeFeo Jr. had taken the lives of both his parents and his 4 siblings in the home as they slept. In 1975, the Lutz family purchased the home, but after just 28 days, they left, claiming to have experienced a string of paranormal occurrences. They said to have seen ooze sliding down their walls. There was a strange odor in the home, probably from the ooze. They'd hear doors slam on their own, as well as other objects moving, and they encountered swarms of flies right in the middle of winter. Even if there was no demonic spirit involved, yeah, I'd be out of that house with all that gross crap going on too.